Hi everyone, my name is Peggy Hawes and I am the Interpretation Public Program Coordinator here at the Brockville Museum, and currently we are in our river exhibit where we talk about how the river has played such a vital role to Brockville. And actually in this case beside me, we highlight one of the interesting stories here in Brockville, and that's about the shipwrecks that have happened here. We've had quite a few different shipwrecks that have happened in Brockville waters, and I have 3 of them I'd like to tell you about today. The first one, the Robert Gaskin, is a little bit of an interesting story, and that's because this is a ship that actually sank 3 times. The first time it went down on a sandbar, people decided, you know what, we'll just bring it up and bring it back as a tow tug. So they fix it back up, and then they keep going, and it's about the late 1800s at this point. Then one day they decide that they'll use it just off of Blockhouse Island to help bring up a tug, or rather a railway ferry, that was called the William Armstrong, that was from the US and had just sunk as it was coming into Brockville waters. So they bring the Robert Gaskin in, and they bring in big tanks that they'll fill with air to help raise the William Armstrong, but all of a sudden it seems that one of these tanks slipped and it goes blasting out of the water through the Robert Gaskin, and the crew on board the Gaskin only has a couple of seconds before all of a sudden the Gaskin is on the bottom of the St. Lawrence River. Well, they decide they still need the Gaskin, so they start to try to bring it up. They use tanks again and they use other equipment to get it back up. And just as it's starting to come up, and it takes them hours to get it up, they realize that maybe the damage to the ship is a little bit more than they thought. And all of a sudden, it starts sinking again when it slips its tow cable. This time when it sinks, it goes right on top of the William Armstrong. Well, now they definitely have to move the Gaskin if they want to get the Armstrong, so they start raising everything again. By this time, the water is freezing, it's December, and finally, they're able to get the Robert Gaskin up to the surface. They start towing it over to the docks near what is now Centene Park, and about 200 feet from shore, it slips its tow cable and it sinks to the bottom of the river again. This time, however, they decide they'll just leave it there, and that's where it actually has stayed to this day. Another shipwreck that's happened in Brockville waters is the Lily Parsons, and we actually have some artifacts from that shipwreck right here. So the Lily Parsons was a schooner that was moving cargo in the 1870s when a storm came out of nowhere and shifted all the cargo on board. Because of that and all that shifting, all the water got on and it ended up sinking just off of Sparrow Island. Well, it stayed lost for almost 150 years until in 1963, a man was fishing just off of the island in his little boat. Well, he goes to put down his anchor to stay in one area, and the anchor ends up not being connected, and it sinks to the bottom of the river. So he sends his son and a friend of his son down diving to try to find the anchor, and when they do, they actually find the Lily Parsons. And they find all the cargo that she sank with, and quite a few different goods that are really interesting that we have here, and that you can also see on our database. The last shipwreck I want to tell you about is the J.B. King, and this is one that people may have heard of before. So in the 1930s, they were trying to widen the channels in the St. Lawrence River for shipping. And they needed things like the J.B. King, which was the largest drill boat in Canada at that time. So they were out with a crew of about 40, blasting away at the rock to make the water depths deeper. The problem is, a storm came out of nowhere. When this storm came, lightning struck the rigging, traveled down the metal cords to the dynamite that was on board. Well, the explosion came out of nowhere and rocked the whole town. Of those 40 crew members, only 12 survived, and many of the bodies were never recovered. And to this day, you can go to Cockburn Island and still see the memorial that was put up for those men. So when you have the chance, please make sure to check out our website and our database to see the different stories and artifacts that connect to the stories we have talked about today.